Some things you say out loud and immediately want back. Some things you say out loud and feel a quiet, horrible relief, because now the room finally knows what you have been carrying alone. I said something at Daniel's birthday party that I told myself was a joke. I told myself this so many times and so quickly that I almost believed it before the laughter even faded. The silence that followed lasted about 4 seconds. The silence after that lasted for the rest of my marriage. My name is Claire Novak, and I am 34 years old, and I am the kind of person who has always believed that needing things loudly is the fastest way to lose them. I work in marketing strategy. I shape narratives for a living, which means I have spent the better part of my adult life understanding exactly how a story can be packaged to produce a specific feeling in the person receiving it. I am good at my job. I am good, in a similar way, at being in rooms. I know how to walk into a party and find the conversation worth having, how to read who is performing and who is genuinely present, how to make people feel that talking to me is something worth doing. I have spent years building this version of myself with real care, and it has served me well, and I am only now beginning to understand what it cost me to build it. Daniel and I have been married for 4 years, and together for 6. He is a civil engineer, patient, logistically attentive, the kind of man who remembers everything you say once in passing and produces it weeks later without announcement or expectation of credit. He brought back a ceramic mug from a work trip to Porto 2 years into our marriage. Dark blue glaze, small white chip on the handle from a fall it survived. He has given me my coffee in that mug every single morning since. I notice the chip every time. I have never told him I like that he uses that one specifically. I have told myself this is a small thing, and small things do not require documentation. And people who require documentation of small things are people who cannot be satisfied by large ones. This is the logic I have been running on. It has not served me as well as I believed. In the apartment on a Sunday morning 3 months before everything became something I cannot walk back, he set the Porto mug on the counter beside me without comment and went back to reading. I held it with both hands and looked at his shoulders while he read and thought the word predictable and felt briefly ashamed of myself for it. The shame dissolved quickly. It always did. At dinner with Simone and her partner that week, she described Daniel as steady, meaning it warmly, and I agreed with a smile that felt entirely natural because I had been producing natural-feeling smiles for years. Later in the bathroom, I tried to name what I was actually carrying and could not find a word that did not sound like ingratitude, so I put the feeling away and went to bed. And the phone on my nightstand was face down, a habit 3 weeks established, and I did not think about why. The company's annual winter reception was where it started, or where I let it start, which is a distinction I have worked very hard to blur. Marcus Hale was a sales director 1 floor above my workspace, 40, divorced once, the kind of person who makes you feel that the conversation you are having is the most interesting thing happening in the building at that precise moment. At the reception, he asked about my childhood in a town I don't often mention, pushed back on something I said about market positioning, then changed his own position and told me exactly why he'd changed it. I drove home beside Daniel, who had spent the evening in a productive discussion with the building's CEO about HVAC systems, and something settled in me like a stone going quiet in water. I did not call it a decision. It was a decision. The first dinner on Elgin Street was a Tuesday evening 3 weeks later. Marcus had researched a wine I'd mentioned liking from a trip 2 years ago. I had mentioned it once, at a networking event, in a sentence not directed at him. He produced it at the table as if it were the most ordinary thing in the world to listen that carefully to someone. I registered this as intimacy. I did not register it as what else it could be. Afterward, I deleted a text thread with Marcus, not because it was explicit at that point, but because the tone of it was specific enough that I could no longer pretend it was unremarkable. The deletion took 3 seconds. I watched myself make it and did not stop. There was a brief, ugly feeling of power in it that I did not examine. 2 nights after that dinner, Daniel had the joint card statement pulled up on his laptop when I came in. He did not turn the screen toward me or lead with an accusation. He asked, while looking at the screen, whether I'd been out near Elgin Street the previous Tuesday. His voice carried the tone of someone genuinely curious, not assembling a case. He asked who I'd been with, what I'd ordered, whether the food was good. Someone had apparently mentioned the risotto was worth trying. I told him it was a colleague, a work dinner, and he accepted this and returned to his work. I stood in the kitchen doorway and stared at the back of his head and translated his acceptance into evidence of indifference. I told myself that a man who actually cared would have pressed harder. I believed this with complete sincerity. It was the wound running the logic, and I could not see it running. That same week, later and quieter, he came to me when I was getting ready for work and told me, calmly and without anger, that he'd noticed the phone was face down on the nightstand now, something new, and that if there was something I wanted to tell him, he was asking me to tell him. He said it was a small thing, but he was naming it because small things that sit unnamed had a way of becoming larger things later, and he would rather know now than learn it differently. I told him his problem was that he made everything about logistics, phone position, receipts, schedules, instead of asking himself whether the emotional architecture of the marriage was actually working. He was quiet for a moment. He said he was trying to ask precisely that. I left for work. The Porto mug was on the counter, full, growing cold while I was already out the door. I told Simone a version of what was happening at her apartment that Thursday. I showed her one text from Marcus, warm and specific, calling back a joke I'd made. She said carefully that it looked like more than a work situation. I told her I knew what I was doing, which was a sentence she had heard from me at 3 points in my adult life, and she poured more wine and said nothing further. Her silence was not support, though I received it as support. She was watching something happen that she found more compelling than her own careful life, and she was choosing the wrong kind of quiet for reasons that had as much to do with herself as with me, and neither of us understood this at the time. The night I came home late to find Daniel asleep on the couch with dinner covered and set on the stove. He'd cooked, late, timed to my expected return. I stood in the kitchen looking at the covered dish and felt something cross my face that I suppressed immediately. I did not wake him. I put the food in the refrigerator. I went to bed. Over the following days, I replayed the image of him asleep on the couch and decided it proved he was unbothered by my absence, that if my coming home had mattered to him, he would have stayed awake. The reader of my own life had access to the same image I did and was reaching an entirely different conclusion. But I was doing the reading, and I was very good at it, and that was the trouble. That week, in the bathroom, his silhouette through the frosted shower glass went still and patient, while the notification light on my phone blinked on the counter. I did not pick the phone up. I did not move it away either. I stood in the rising steam and watched his outline until the mirror fogged completely, and there was nothing to see anymore. Daniel turned 37 at Ryan and Cara Callahan's house on a Saturday in early autumn. Ryan had known Daniel since their first year of university and loved him with the specific, uncomplicated devotion of a person who has decided that some people are simply worth it. The backyard at 14 Ashwood Close had paper lanterns strung between 2 trees and a long table, and 11 people who all, in various ways, knew Daniel better than they knew me. I was Daniel's wife in that backyard. I knew this role. I had been in versions of it before, defined by my relationship to someone else rather than by my own exceptionalism, and it sat on me like something borrowed and slightly wrong in the collar. 3 hours in, I had made my rounds. I was sitting at the garden table with Cara and 2 other women, and I was the most interesting person at that end of the table. Funny, warm, the centre of a small orbit, and still, somehow, still, Daniel was across the yard being held by his people in a way that made something in me feel like it was quietly losing ground. Ryan gave a toast. He said Daniel was the most reliable man any of them knew, the kind of person who showed up without being asked and kept his word because keeping his word was simply who he was. Ryan believed this without reservation, and his voice carried the specific quality of that belief. And the table drank, and I drank, and the thing I had been carrying went looking for a door. Someone said something about Daniel teaching them his ways, and laughter moved around the table, and there was an open moment, and I took it. I aimed it at Ryan, which was deliberate in a way I did not examine then. I said lightly, with the ease of someone who believes she is being charming, that maybe Ryan should be the one doing some teaching, that the satisfaction department in our marriage was a little understaffed. I delivered it with a social smile. I believed genuinely that I was being charming. This is the part I have had to sit with longest. I was not performing confidence. I thought I had it. The blind spot was that complete. Ryan did not laugh. His face went to the specific place that faces go when something has been heard and stored. He looked at Daniel's empty chair. Daniel had set his glass on the garden table with the careful deliberateness of a person managing his hands, said he was going to get more ice, and gone inside. And then Ryan looked at me. Cara made a sound that was not a laugh. Two other people found their drinks with the synchronized attention of people who want to be elsewhere. A colleague of Daniel's named Brett, who had known him 9 years, looked directly at me and then away quickly, as if he'd walked into a room that was private. No one picked up the thread. The joke died in the garden air, and the silence that replaced it had the exact shape of the sentence I'd said. For 4 seconds, watching Ryan watch the door Daniel had gone through, I thought clearly and coldly that I should not have said it. Then I reached for my wine and drank and reconstructed the performance. No one saw those 4 seconds. Cara saw them. She would remember them. He came back 11 minutes later. He rejoined the group at its edge. He told 2 people about a project he was working on. He refilled a glass that needed refilling. He did not look at me from across the yard, not once for the remaining hour and a half of the party. I told myself he was sulking. I told myself his quiet was a performance of wounded pride designed to make me feel guilty. This was easier than the other explanation. When I got home that night, Daniel had stayed to help Ryan with something he'd said. I walked into the kitchen and found the Porto mug on the counter with cold coffee still at the level he would have filled it. He had made it for my return time. I had not come home when expected. A thin film had formed across the surface. I picked it up and put it in the sink without washing it. Late that night, already in bed, I heard his voice from the second bedroom, door not quite closed, asking Ryan one question. He was asking whether what Ryan had told him earlier was what Ryan had seen or what Cara had seen. I pushed the door open and he looked up and covered the phone with his hand. He told me he would be out in a minute. He had never, in 4 years, asked me to wait for him in my own home. I went to Petra's studio office the following Thursday prepared to be confirmed. Petra was Daniel's younger sister, an architect, and she had invited me for coffee with the framing of concern. She said she had been thinking about me and wanted to check in. I arranged my version of events on the way over. The joke was poorly received by a room full of people too devoted to Daniel to have a sense of humour about their own social dynamics, and the cool period afterward was his pride recovering. And what I needed from this conversation was a person who would see the situation clearly. Petra did not confirm me. She said, without preamble, that she wanted to tell me something she had thought about for 3 years. She described a Sunday family dinner in 2021 at her parents' house, where I had turned to their mother, annoyed at something Daniel had said, and described him as fine but predictable, with the specific dismissiveness of someone who expected the room to hold no consequence for the words. She said she had watched Daniel spend the year after that dinner working, actually working in the ways he knew how, to not be predictable for me. She said she did not believe I had noticed. I told her I did not need her amateur analysis. She said she was not doing analysis, she was describing a dinner. Then she said that I had been doing some version of this for years, in different rooms, and that I seemed to believe no one was keeping track, and that some people were keeping track. I left. I told Simone that evening that Petra had always taken Daniel's side, and always would. I did not mention the specific dinner Petra had described. I did not mention it because I remembered it and could not find a version of it that I was comfortable holding. 3 days after the party, Daniel sat on the edge of the bed in the early evening with his hands open in his lap. Not on his phone, not reading, not organized around a task. I stopped in the doorway. He was simply sitting with something. After a moment he sensed me and stood and asked if I needed anything. And the transition from whatever he had been doing to the upright, functional version of himself happened in under 60 seconds. I thought, he is performing grief to make me feel guilty. He was not. He was a person sitting with the specific weight of a marriage that was changing under him, without a task to hold instead, which was not something I had ever seen him do and which I therefore could not read correctly. I tried the tactical approach between S3 and here. I came to him and said that I knew the joke had been poorly timed and that I was sorry if it had embarrassed him. The word was if. The structure was designed to close the subject rather than open it, to let him receive the shape of an apology without the substance of one, and to have the matter handled. He said carefully that he had things he was thinking through. I escalated immediately. I told him that his silence had always been the actual problem in our marriage, not anything I had said, that his refusal to address things directly was the pattern we were trapped in, not my honesty. This was, in some complicated way, the truest thing I had said in months. I was using it as a door that I could walk through and lock behind me. He said nothing in response to the escalation. He looked at me in a way I could not interpret, and then went to make tea. The apology that was supposed to close things had given him more clarity than anything else I had said. I could not see this happening. 2 days later, Cara texted me directly. Warm, careful wording, asking if we could find time to talk, asking if I was all right. I put the phone face down. I read it again the next morning. I told myself she was performing concern on Daniel's behalf, that the text was intelligence gathering dressed as friendship. I was not entirely wrong about her motivation. I was wrong about the nature of what she already knew. That evening, I went to open the second drawer of his filing cabinet, the one that had always held our shared household documents in comfortable disorder, and found it reorganized. Labeled folders in his handwriting, neat and specific, and my name on the tabs of certain documents that had been separated into their own section. I stood looking at it and told myself he was channeling the stress of the situation into tidying, the way he sometimes did, the way he reorganized in difficult periods. I closed the drawer. Then I opened my laptop to check our shared calendar. 4 years of Sunday walks and dinner reservations and bill reminders. A small record of a life run together. Every future entry had been removed. Not deleted. The past was still there in grey, years of it, every shared thing we had ever scheduled. But from this week forward, the calendar was white. The past entirely present, the future entirely blank, and I sat at the kitchen table looking at it until the screen went dark. The quarterly sales dinner was at the Granger Hotel, a private dining room, 30 people, my manager present 3 seats to my left. I was seated next to Marcus. A colleague made a comment about couples at the office, a light social observation, the kind of comment that moves through a room and usually dissolves. And I said, with Marcus beside me and my manager close enough to hear, that Marcus and I had a better dynamic than most marriages I had encountered. I said it lightly. 2 colleagues looked between us. Marcus laughed in the way a person laughs when they do not know what else to do, and then looked at his plate. He was not complicit. He was uncomfortable. I received his laugh as shared understanding. It was not. He was waiting in the apartment hallway when I came home the following Thursday. He named the restaurant on Elgin Street. He named both Tuesday evenings. He said he knew about both of them. His voice had the tone of someone who has completed a calculation and is now reading the result aloud. Not anger, not accusation, but the specific clarity of someone who has been collecting facts for a reason and has enough of them now to speak directly. He named Marcus Hale and asked, without pressure, what the arrangement had been on those Tuesday evenings. He said he was not asking to catch me or to punish me. He was asking because he was trying to see whether there was anything left to save, and he could not see clearly without the truth, and I was the only person who could give it to him. I did not deny Marcus. I pivoted. I told him his problem was not Marcus, that his problem was that he had never, in 6 years, once asked me directly what I actually needed from the marriage. That I had been waiting for years for someone to ask the real questions, and I had finally found a person who asked them, and his response was to treat it as a matter of logistics and ego. I used the word finally, and I put all the weight of years into it, and I watched his face. He was quiet for a long moment. Then he said he understood now. He said he would handle the rest properly. He went into the bedroom and closed the door with the same care he gave every door, as if the furniture deserved gentleness, regardless of the circumstances. I stood in the hallway. The word properly was not a threat. It was worse than a threat. It was the sound of a decision that had already been made. 4 mornings after that conversation, Marcus came through the building lobby with 2 colleagues and saw me waiting by the elevator. He nodded, a nod that was friendly, professional, and precisely bounded. He did not come over. He did not text before lunch. He did not text by evening. 3 days passed. By the end of the 3rd day, I was checking my phone with a frequency and a texture that I recognized from somewhere much older than this situation. There was a pulling feeling in my chest, the specific quality of waiting to be chosen, and I had felt it before. I was 12, in the back seat of my father's car after my sister's school performance, listening to my father describe my sister's talent for the entire drive home while I said nothing about needing to be noticed too. I was not 12. I was 34. The feeling was exactly the same. He became logistical in the apartment, telling me he had a professional appointment Thursday at 11, that it was private, that he would be out. I asked who the meeting was with. He said it was a private appointment. He used the word professional in the same neutral register he used for everything else, and I heard it as information withheld as punishment. The reader of this situation would have understood that he was meeting with his attorney, already retained for 3 weeks, and that the appointment at 11 on Thursday was the 3rd such meeting. I came home on a Friday night late to find the inner deadbolt engaged, the one we had installed 4 years ago and had never once used. I had to knock at my own door. He opened it and stepped aside politely, and there was a second place setting across from his at the table. Clean plate, unused fork, the place set while I was still on my way home. He had made dinner for one and set a second plate anyway, and the empty plate sitting there while he ate across from it was the most careful version of a message I had ever received. And I understood, standing in the doorway, that he had been planning this specific exchange for longer than tonight. On a Tuesday evening, 11 days after the hallway conversation, at 6:14 in the evening, I came through my building's lobby toward the elevator bank, and a man was waiting near the button. He called my name. He handed me a large envelope as I reached him. Inside was a formal divorce petition filed by Daniel's attorney, accompanied by temporary financial orders requesting an immediate freeze on all joint accounts pending full financial disclosure, with the first hearing scheduled 23 days from today. I read the full petition in the elevator. When the elevator reached the 4th floor, I did not step out. I pressed the lobby button. I rode it back down. I stood in the lobby when the doors opened and took the stairs to the apartment instead. For no reason I could name then, though I think I understand it now. I was not ready to arrive anywhere. The petition's exhibit list contained 3 items. The first was a restaurant receipt ledger from Elgin Street on 2 Tuesday evenings, with timestamps. The second was a location entry from a shared family subscription account, a service we'd both connected to years ago and forgotten about, placing me at a parking garage on a date I had said I was somewhere else. The third was a screenshot provided to Daniel's attorney by Cara Callahan, showing my phone screen visible from across a table at a girls' night dinner 2 months before the birthday party. The screenshot showed the top of a text thread. The name visible was Marcus Hale. Cara had seen it at the dinner and said nothing then. She was not certain enough and did not want to be the person who broke a marriage on a glimpse. The birthday party joke made her certain. She told Ryan. Ryan told Daniel. Daniel told his attorney. There was no surveillance. There was no investigator. There was a receipt, a location log, and a glimpse of a phone screen at a dinner table. 3 items. That was enough. At the mediation appointment 14 days after service, I opened by telling Adele, the mediator, 19 years in practice, that the filing was Daniel's emotional response to a joke that had been poorly received, and that the divorce petition was about ego and his need to punish honesty rather than about any irreconcilable difference. Adele listened without interruption. Then she said, without unkindness and without hedging, that the process was not about the joke. It was about the exhibit documentation in the filing. She asked whether I wanted to address the documentation. I said it was one-sided. She said that was precisely what the process existed to resolve, and offered me 2 dates for response submission. I looked at Daniel across the table. He was looking at the surface in front of him and making a note on the page he had brought. He was wearing the grey linen shirt I had found for him at a weekend market 4 years ago. I had seen it on a rack and thought of him before I touched it. He did not look different from how he had always looked. He was entirely unfamiliar to me, and the unfamiliarity was a specific kind of grief, and I had no name for it, and I had no one to give the name to if I found one. The final contradiction arrived in a storage unit on Riverside Drive on a Saturday afternoon, in the smell of nothing, climate-controlled and silent. I opened a kitchen box and found the Porto mug wrapped in dish towels. Dark blue glaze. Chip on the handle left side, exactly where it had always been. I held it and thought about the fact that I had never told him I liked that he used that one specifically. And then, with a clarity that felt less like insight and more like something obvious becoming visible after a long time in poor light, I thought about the thing I had been refusing to think about. I had spent 4 years slowly, thoroughly convinced that he didn't really want to know me, and in 4 years I had not once said to him, not in a letter, not a note, not at a kitchen table, not on a Sunday walk by the river, here is what I actually need from you. Here is what would make me feel chosen. Here is the specific thing I have been waiting for. I performed the woman who didn't need to ask. I waited for him to intuit it. I used his failure to intuit it as evidence that he hadn't cared enough to try. I then used Marcus, who researched a wine I'd mentioned once because research is also what you do before you leave, as proof that real attention existed. The performance did not protect me. It selected for the one person who specifically wanted someone with no requirements. I put the mug back in the box. I closed the box. I did not write anything on the outside to indicate what was inside. Closure snapshot. She moved into Simone's guest room within the week, 8 feet by 10, the wrong fabric softener in the sheets. The joint accounts were frozen. 3 automatic payments she had forgotten were tied to them stopped simultaneously on a Monday morning. Ryan and Cara did not contact her after the mediation date. 3 couples they had known jointly went quiet within 2 weeks. Not hostile, simply absent. Her manager called her in for an informal check-in. The email follow-up 3 weeks later confirmed that a formal documentation note had been added to her file as standard procedure. Marcus sent a text on the 4th day after service, using the word lands as if a life restructuring around specific choices were a weather system passing through. She called, he didn't pick up. She sent 3 sentences, direct and true and specific about what she had believed this was. He read them. The red receipt appeared. He did not reply. She moved into a sublet above a cafe a month later. On a Tuesday morning, she sat at a table with a different mug and tried not to think about the river path. She thought about it anyway. The blue mug is in a box in a storage unit on Riverside Drive, and she has stopped asking herself why she didn't take it, because she already knows.